at some point, what I'm hearing is that your interest shifted into scale formation instead of composition. Or did you compose some music in 31?
In my mind, and that scale formation and composition are not two different things. That you compose the scale as you're composing, and you use the scale that is right. But I got this from there were two gentlemen way back in the Tulies back there in Iowa, Erv Wilson, got a grant to figure out whether we were actually tuning scales in J-I or in E-T. Mm-hmm. And they started...
That's Boomsliter and Creole?
There you go, thank you. And they had the monies, and they set up sets of equipment to measure very, very careful on a sliding string what people were doing. What they found out that people were not playing in either equal or just. They were just playing impossibly out of tune. Impossibly out of tune. And but they began looking at things, and they said, but it looks like they're playing in with one tuning when they're in one key, but if they move to another key, they go to a different tuning. If you're in the key of C and you play a D chord, then the A will go upward by a comma. Then if you're playing in C major, and in fact, two things will happen if you if you just modulate from C major to G major, you have to raise the F, and you have to by a semitone, a chromatic semitone, and you have to raise the A by a comma. And I realized that, and they called that extended reference. And they wrote a number of articles published in the Yale Journal of Music Theory, which I devoured voraciously. And I swear I must have been the only person on earth who had the remotest idea of what they were talking about. Because Yale was buying it up. They were publishing their articles right down the line, not realizing that what Boomsliter and Creole were saying was pulling all of the props out from under E.T. Well, finally, Boomsliter and Creole, for no particular reason whatsoever, ran out of funds. They couldn't get their funds renewed, and so their research dwindled. I mean, people out there where they were doing the university response had no idea what they just a couple of nice young men who were doing some rare studies, and they were calling. They had their equipment, and they had to sort of close up shop, and weren't able to continue they weren't getting their salaries, and so this was brought prematurely to an unfortunate halt. If they could only have been allowed to continue the researches, they would have gone on, and because they believed that probably the same kind of extended reference patterns existed in other cultures as well. Well, of course they do. The first example of that is Japanese and Balinese music, where they'll change the pitches depending on what key they are. And but at any rate, somewhere around there, I got to meet adhering, Tillman Schaefer, and a number of the people, they had built 19-tone instruments. And Derek has built a quarter-tone clavichord. They were just beautiful, but he didn't have any idea about the other divisions besides quarter tones. I had to teach him that there were other tunings, and then I found a little guitar shop, Condela's Guitar Shop, that would refret guitars for me, and glory be, hallelujah. I got the first guitar built. It was a little 17-tone guitar, but I could get good 17 ET, and there's still people out there that love 17 ET. What I like about it is when you make a 34-tone scale out of it. But I had a number of guitars made to different tunings, and if I couldn't get the tuning, I could shift the bridge a little way.
Yeah, you had me make I had a 22 and a 41 made.
Yes.
Yeah, I still have them.
Well, they're in here.
Yeah.
Do you have some too?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
I thought I had your. Okay, all right, but
I actually have your 22, and I think I have your 22.
I still have the 41.
Yeah.
He has my 22, but I have the 41.
I think I have yours, your Candelas.
Okay, that one, I'm not sure who that belonged to now. It may have been. But anyway, somebody, somehow or other, one of my guitars, it was a harmonic series guitar. Anyway, by that time, I had met Harry Partch.
What year are we talking about?
Huh?
What years are we talking about?
He had been up north in that little town, Petaluma, and he'd come down to here, and he lived out there in the valley. I don't remember, some little town out in the valley there, just going across that little, taking the road up over the hill there, and you drop down into a little area there, and I can't remember.
It doesn't matter, but this was in the 60s, early 60s,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Or late, middle 60s.
Yeah, and very early 60s.
Yeah.
It was just after 1963 that I first met Harry Partch.
Mm-hmm. What was that meeting like?
It was nice. It was nice. How I got in touch with Harry Partch was interesting. And I was down on the beach one day, and this young man happened to be there. He'd just come down from Petaluma. I just learned that he'd just come down from Petaluma, and I asked him a few questions, and he knew Harry Partch, as it turned out. And I said, "Oh, do you have his address?" And the guy was interested because he was an author. He was writing a book, and he appreciated the way I used words. Once in a while I'd use words in a way that absolutely shocked him, or just amazed him. So he pulled out of his wallet, he pulled out Harry Partch's address and gave it to me, and I wrote to Harry Partch and wrote him some of the things that I had been doing. And then Harry Partch moved down to the valley, and I got in touch with him there and started helping him put the reverse them together, and would schlep him around over to UCLA where they had a workshop, and we'd go over there and work free, and he'd buy up all the redwood, and I helped him put the whole thing together, and it was really a privilege and pleasure helping him put the diamond reverse them together. And so he had me do a little bit of artwork, but I always, and he said, well, I'm going to mention I'm going to mention my book. For, he didn't quite exactly understand the geometric relationship between the diamond and the diamond reverse. And I says, well, if you get down under the thing and turn upside down and look at it from underneath, that in a just particular way, you get the diamond reversal. And so he actually wrote that down in the volume of his book, and he told me, he says, oh, I'm going to be famous. And he says, oh, stop it. But I began to show him, by that time, I had come across these rather, by the sheerest promptings of that silent voice that told me to keep on looking. It's written down there, but something told me to keep on looking, and I discovered that. Well, first of all, Paul Beaver explained to me what Pascal's triangle was. I went over to Paul Beaver's place, and he had a group of very, very talented people who'd show up there about once a week, or at least twice a month. And we would get together and discuss and show and tell. And film composers that worked with electronic music, that did the music for Forbidden Planet. That did remind me if you can. John and Baron, I forget. Anyway, they did some very, very impressive electronic music for Forbidden Planet, which I thought I wasn't all that impressed by, but it was good music. Was it John and Baby Baron?
Couple.
It was a couple, married couple. Anyway, we wouldn't be over there, and there was also a very, very accomplished vocalist who did vocal techniques over there, and people like that. And I would go over there and show my things off. And Paul Beaver agreed to do some tuning for me. And he says, but don't tell anybody what I've charged you. Just don't let anybody know. And he did the metallophone, the 22-tone metallophone, which Craig Grady now has in his ensemble. And then we started tuning up the transplants, which Mike Grady would play, and they would beat it out of tune. And I found out that I couldn't use 22E2, the ET, that I wasn't happy with it. By that time I learned how to make a interesting 22 just with 7 limits. And when you and I do a lot of theoretical experimentation on 22, we had a whole stack of 22 tunings.
Yeah, still have.
And so I set it up in a just tuning and was much happier in the just tuning. And well, but at any rate, when Harry Partch came down here, I finally had the courage to actually listen. Well, actually, at an earlier point, I had ordered all of his use. When I was at BYU, I thought, oh, I shouldn't listen to any of Harry Partch. I'll read his theories, but I don't want to be unduly influenced by his style, so I'd better not listen to him. But by the time I got his address from this very famous writer, by the way, who wrote a very, very successful book. And he would read me chapters of the book, and I'd say, well, that's good, that's quite good. And I could see why he was going to be successful, but I never dreamed that he would be such an outrageous success. He teaches now down there at USC. He's on the teaching staff at USC.
What's his name?
Huh?
What's his name?
Teacher.
I have to leave the name unspoken because it discloses a little bit too much, more than I want the kiddies to know.
Okay.
Off film, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I mean, some children do, at least in the Mormon church, have to have things sanitized. Not so much these days as they used to. But by that time, I was getting together with Harry Partch, and I was doing lattice works for him. And I did a lattice work for him, showing him, this is the way I would lattice your scale. And he looked at it, non-comprehending. But the next time I saw him, he called me to the side. He says, I've been looking at your lattice. And he says, you know something? I understand it. I understand. He was so pleased with himself to see that somebody would be doing, and it wasn't until he saw that I was able to put his keyboard on the Boomsliter keyboard with only one redundancy and its mirror image, that he began to see. In his later years, he began to regret having burnt so many bridges behind him. He thought, oh, I burnt too many bridges. Here I am, isolated in the universe with no connection to any past whatsoever. When he saw that everything that he did could be placed right on the Boomsliter with uncanny mapping. I mean, it was the way it fits on there is absolutely uncanny. The man's intuition, he say he was not a good theorist. His theoretical nature was working overtime and overtime. And he says he was a good theorist. And he says, oh, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a good, I just like to make my own instruments, and these scales don't really mean anything. I was switching all over the place. He was a prophet. He literally was prophetic because he was doing things that he didn't have the words for. Mm-hmm. And now we're learning what those words are. He didn't know what the Fibonacci series was. He didn't know what Pascal's triangle was. He didn't, at any rate, Partch is very, very central to the things that are going on. And it pleases me that I can add and contribute to the understanding of what Partch actually means.
Right.
No end. But Augusto Navarro was doing things quite parallel to the Partch. At the same time, in some ways, not up to Partch, in other ways, somewhat beyond Partch. But usually it turns out that people who work with string lengths and strings get a very, very firm grasp of the ratio, where if they're just tuning things up with no strings there, their grasp of the ratio is not as tactile. They're not as visible. If you can see where the string is divided into this many parts, and then all you need is a string division to tell you which. Well, the Greeks do that. The Indians, the Greeks knew things that the people of India didn't know. The people of India knew things that they couldn't quite describe. They would call them by strange names, and give the most awkward. Well, they did awfully well with what they did, but they didn't have any concept for the harmonic series. When they were using the fifth harmonic or the seventh harmonic, they didn't know how to tell you the ratio. The Greeks did. And it wasn't until around the 13th century when Indian music was profoundly influenced by Persian music that the people of India finally began to grasp the subtle idea of ratios. In the earliest of days, their verbiage says they understood how to tune the chain of fifths, and they could carry it out quite a few places. In fact, they could not only tune it out to 17 places, Pythagorean, they could add a few more tones and get their 22 shrutis, and they worked. Miraculously, somehow they worked. And it is a miracle, but the miracle is based on the schisma. An interval that is so small that it can be hardly heard, and if you tune it up on your tunable instruments, it's not likely that you'll know it was there. You'll lose it in your slippage. Nothing will hold. But anyway, by that time I was in touch with Harry, and I was very, very aggressively moving ahead on the keyboard front. And even if I don't, and even when I didn't have any instrument at all, I figured out ways. Fretting guitars, I just had Larry's Scaletron for a while where I could tune things up.
I remember.
And
You still have that in there.
how's that?
Isn't that what you have inside?
You have that inside still?
It's still inside. The motor of it, the cooling motor is not working, and I haven't actually used it. Some of the switches may have rusted into place and will need to be fixed up, but it's sitting in there. There are other Scaletrons around somewhere in town. There's another one. That I have no idea where it is. But the reason I don't want to spend a lot of money retuning the Scaletron, it does have one feature that I like. There are areas of the Scaletron where I can get into absolute. And absolute is a beautiful territory to be in. There's absolutely no digital cannot duplicate absolute.
If someone was not musical, how would you describe to them what absolute means? If someone didn't know what you're talking about.
I would say it's like not just gazing into paradise, it's going into paradise. It's a paradisal experience. And digital I've yet to hear digital that can do absolute and be truly convincing and on the fly. You get people doing rapid trills and rapid movements. Hobbs plays so fast that sometimes the digital nature of what he's doing shows through anyway. And people are saying, well, how accurate do you have to get? As accurate as you can get. And even David Radis has there is sometimes, he supposedly he was doing absolute for Le Bon Young, but he says sometimes there's aberrations that slip in there, just little stuff that slips in.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
Let's summarize kind of at this point, because we have some musical questions we want to ask later after we take a break.
Oh, sure.
But there's something I wanted to ask you. Let's assuming there was a generating tone to your life and how all of this developed. Could you verbalize anything about that? What was the underlying motivation that kept taking you into all these various areas of interest that most people didn't follow?
Because I could hear them.
What made you have a passion for what you heard?
What makes me have a passion for growing corn?
Yeah.
I was
Good
born
question.
in it. I was born in a cornfield. I was born into music. The reason I have a passion for music is because I know that in some ways I'm very good at it. Not always. I don't have discrete control over my fingers. But in some aspects of music, I'm very, very good at it.
I also sense some kind of ideological passion behind it too.
Ideological? What does that word mean?
That means something you believe in but you can't actually prove.
No, it's not that. It's the music itself that lives in me. It's that a part of my brain thinks in music. I wake up in the mornings when I'm out in the quiet. I will wake up in a certain key. And I've been there. A good part of my brain is actually a musical brain. And that's a way of thinking. It's difficult to say anything rational about the musical brain, but it's a language that we have, a very valid language that we have for dealing with ineffables. Things that cannot otherwise be spoken.
Right.
Why do people write poetry? Why do people dance? Why do people do anything that they have a passion for?
But I'm interested in what you did it for.
Huh?
I'm interested in what... I know we've all done it in some way or another, but you in particular.
Oh. Because I couldn't help it. That's about that. It's just... If I don't do music, I say, well, what are you going to do? Feed the pigeons?
How are we going to take?
What's that?
Are you out of that?
Yeah, 3 minutes left.
You have 3 minutes left? Is that real?
Yeah.
You want a break? You take
I don't care.